Curse of Stradh, Part 9, Chapter 9, Tsolenka Pass. Now, Tsolenka Pass, as you'll see by the map here, is essentially a gravel road that hugs Mount Gaucus. Nearby is Lake Luna. Now, I'll show you some maps of the area. This is a third-party map of this particular area, focusing on the guard tower and the actual gatehouse. This is the official Mike's Glee map. Player characters are likely going to come in from this direction. Note that's actually west. It's a little confusing with the way this is set up, as it looks like they're coming from the south, of course, and then there's this bridge, and then it continues. You can see why that is, as when you look at the Barovia area map, player characters actually come down the road. Most likely, location T is Tsolenka Pass. They hit the bridge and theoretically can cross, going east. Note that the only thing to the east is location X, the Amber Temple. Also, the road does wander on to the south, toward the Miss, towards a different land of dread, and one would say the extended lands of Barovia, as Barovia once technically does control other regions that are off this map, if you really want to go into the history of Barovia and older editions. Now, as you're looking at this particular map, you'll note that it's not very big. There's the gates, there's the guard tower, there's the bridge. This is what the guard tower and gate looks like from a distance. There is some art in this adventure that also kind of gives a better idea of what it looks like. For example, the gate, part of the broken bridge, and apparently an absolutely massive rock, which is way too big in reality for what size it would be. This rock must be like directly beyond this statue. This is the bridge, I should say, not the tower. And yes, the player characters will likely face a rock in this situation. Now, as you're looking further into the adventure, the player characters are going to come from the west, the south side of this map. They're given a description of what's ahead, and it's basically a walled gate, but there's fire within the actual gate itself. And if they go through that, they're going to get burned. The gate is roughly 20 feet tall, lined with spikes. The gatehouse is 30 feet tall. Now, of course, most player characters are just going to be like, well, we'll just go around the gate. But there are incredibly steep cliffs on both sides. On the north side, which is, well, right here, it goes up. And this side, it goes down. So the player characters better have some ability to climb walls, or climbing kits, or in the case of my group, an Aarakocra, or some other ability to fly. But don't worry, those who built this gate knew what they were doing. Over the gate are two statues that look like vultures, and they're actually petrified rocks, or not rocks, rocks, I should say. They become unpetrified if the player characters try to bypass the gate, which they are, of course, extremely likely to do, knowing the player characters and all that, saying, we're going to get past this gate one way or another. So they're probably going to have to fight two Vrox. Now, very low level player characters are not going to be able to win this fight. They shouldn't have a chance of winning this fight. In many ways, this whole encounter, this whole location, essentially just makes it difficult for low level characters to reach location X, which they should go to later in the campaign. I would even argue that location X, Amber Temple, is probably even more difficult than location K, which is Castle Ravenloft, just depending on what they encounter in each location, of course. Now, it's also potentially the location of one of the treasures. Literally, the treasures could be anywhere in any of the locations in Barovia. If the player characters, their fortunes at least, say that the treasure is here, then they will encounter 6 snow maidens here. These are essentially slightly altered specters. Here's their stats, more or less, which would still be a very dangerous fight for first or maybe even second level characters. If the player characters have reached third level, this might be a fight that they can actually win at that point against the Snow Maidens. Now, the Vrox, if they're going to deal with the Vrox, if they're not at least third level, they're probably going to get killed. They might be able to take it at third. They probably can take both at fourth and everything beyond, but it's meant to be a barrier for a reason. And the player characters don't get the idea that these rocks are too dangerous and are going to just do horrible things to them and they should run away. Well, that's on them. Now, assuming the player characters do kill the rocks or just go through the fire and get badly burned or somehow make it through the wall by some other means, of course, they're going to hit the bridge, which again, I'll show you this image again. This is a random map designed by a third party person, which I actually like better than the Mike Scully map. It only focuses on the wall and the tower itself, but they'll access the tower. This is also on the second level of the tower. I think it says it's the ground floor, but it says it right here is the second level. That's also the T is not a trap, it's the teleportation location. This is a place where if the player characters go into the wrong area in Castle Ravenloft, they'll get teleported to this tower and find themselves here inexplicably. Interestingly enough, on the eastern side of the tower, which is going to make things problematic for groups like that. There's, of course, another level, plus there's the battlement level. So that's another place they could theoretically end up. If the player characters do not have a treasure or their treasure card is not supposed to be here, and the only thing they'll find in the tower is a bunch of loose rocks, perhaps like not the kind that flies around that they will encounter later, but maybe some literal loose rocks, just to use a pun. Maybe some snow. Who knows? Or the DM could still use the snow maidens if you really want to. If you feel like you want another encounter, just take away the information about them saying "Begone, the treasure is ours." They could just say "Begone" with the wind howling. Who knows? Now, you could also include a traveler staying here, perhaps someone that has not tried to cross through the gate, maybe someone from a distant land who has recently arrived. Again, there are bordering domains of dread within the vicinity of Barovia. While Strahd is alive, or present, or active, I should say, they can enter this land from the south, but they can't really leave. So it might be interesting to have, say, a wagon parked outside the tower with a bunch of interesting goods on it. Maybe there is a flesh golem with armor put on it or nailed on it outside, and maybe an alarm spell. And maybe there is a peddler or some other form of trader that's camped there, unable to get their wagon through the gate at all and has nowhere to go, which would be a great trading opportunity should the player characters get through. You could also do other traders as well or other travelers that are trapped here. Maybe a drunken dwarven barbarian who's quite dangerous that is camped upstairs, or just other adventurers that don't understand what's going on and have not been able to get through any of this. There's a lot you could actually add to this location that isn't really present. Now, as you again go on, you'll get to the bridge. When the player characters come to the bridge, one way or another, there is an image, a manifestation of Strahd von Zarevich, who is more or less on a horse. He's cloaked, who is there, and the player characters don't know he is not actually Strahd. It's an illusion. I would have the player characters roll initiative when this happens, and again, roll for Strahd's initiative, especially if you're running this on Roll20 or something. Make them think this is really Strahd. In fact, if you really want to get them, have it be actual Strahd. Maybe Strahd on, it could be a regular horse, but it could be on a zombie horse or a skeletal horse or a nightmare. You can do any of those things. Could be interesting. Now, if it's not Strahd, it's, an illusion that might have one hit point and an AC of 10 that might march forward and take a swing at them, and the bats might show up that might be illusions or something like that. If it is Strahd, perhaps it's just really, really cloudy, and Strahd can come out during the day when it's cloudy. Maybe this is that moment where they encounter him when they least expect it, and maybe they might think that this manifestation is not real when guess what, it is. This is, of course, just an optional idea, of course. Now, I mentioned earlier the rock, and you cited the image. So when the player characters come to the bridge, right here, roughly, That's when they encounter a rock that is living around Mount Caucasus. They might have seen this rock early in the venture, just flying around, somewhere around Barovia. Maybe they were traveling on the road and they saw it flying around this area, which also means it probably has a nest somewhere up in this mountains. Which, of course, if the players have the right climbing gear, they could climb up there and try to find the nest. And maybe some layer treasure or something like that that the rock has gathered over the years. Just an extra thing to think about. The rock is another barrier. The idea is to keep them from continuing onward if they're too low level, as this is a very deadly fight for most player characters, unless they've reached minimum roughly fifth level. I mean, a really well built, large fifth level group could probably take this rock. I think my group was around fifth or sixth. They defeated all this stuff with no real problems as they were heading south. They might have been higher level than that, in fact. And, anyways, the rock would be very, very dangerous. But it's not necessarily after them. It's really just after one of their horses or whatever mounts they have. But if there's no one else to attack, it will go after one of them if it can, and perhaps try to fly off with them toward that mountain. It might be interesting if the player character ends up in a rock's nest and then has to escape in a little, side adventure. Who knows? Or maybe the rock grabs an NPC who's traveling with them, who the player characters then don't know what happens to the NPC. Maybe the NPC does die and is lost up there, maybe with a valuable item. And maybe the NPC has one of the treasures already. I doubt that's the case, but it could happen. The idea of having the player characters needing to go to the rock's nest somewhere in the mountain might be a really interesting follow-up. Now, there is also oddly this giant goat named Sangzor, which is a local legend in Barovia. It's essentially just a giant goat who's smarter than regular goats and resists non-magical damage and escapes pretty easily and disappears in the mist. It's not really meant to be a major threat, more just a weird occurrence that they encounter Sangzor. This is a weird goat that maybe you could use again, or even bring in earlier in the adventure, like the player characters are arriving somewhere near, like, I mean, I recommend bringing it in when they're on the way to the village of Barovia, maybe in the forest, and they encounter this aggressive goat that disappears while it's snowing, and they encounter it again here. That's just an idea. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's just kind of a weird creature that's here, and but you know what? Its pelt, if they were able to kill it, could command the respect of various berserkers within Strahd's domain. This is not a magic item, but the berserkers or barbarians or whatnot will recognize it if they are wearing it that in that case. Now, again, this is quite short, so link a pass and all that. There's not a lot of role playing opportunities in this segment. It's more of a barrier than anything else, but an interesting location rather than just some random encounter. It does kind of add to the lore of Barovia a little bit, and by adding another structure and all that. And it's a good idea to actually use it as an idea of you might not want to go further just yet. It might be more dangerous down the road. Although of course, the player characters could bypass this gate in many different ways. For example, let's say they get here and they want to get past it, they can't get past it, and then they get the idea of going around and going down this road and going to the sunken village of Berez and going through the swamps and then trying to get past it. That's an idea. They could try that. I wouldn't prevent them from doing it. I just make it difficult and then let them see what's on the other side. Maybe it's the rock. Well, obviously it's the Amber Temple. Overall, I'd rate this particular part of Curse of Strahd as a 3.5 out of 5. It's probably the weakest part of the entire campaign so far. It's not bad. It's just not super memorable, but it's interesting and it does serve a purpose. Guys, if you like these reviews and you want to see more of them, feel free to follow, watch, check out the Patreon if you can. The link's in the bio, and stay tuned for more content.